Hello and welcome. You're about to watch the video called The Stress Response. What is the stress response? As part of the Wellbeing Education Resilience Programme. We would like to highlight the Face COVID video by Russ Harris. If you haven't already seen it, please take 5 minutes to watch as it gives you a great overview of how to support well-being as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can click directly on the link when viewing this presentation in slideshow mode. This is the first of the stress response videos, and it covers what is the stress response. Some of the topics touched upon in this video may be discussed in further detail in the concept index or in one of the other webinar videos in the programme. It may be helpful to take a moment to familiarise yourself with some of the other video titles. Should you have any questions in regards to this video, please forward these to your mental health lead and they can be discussed in one of our network meeting Q&As. Here you can see what will be covered in this presentation. If you see the thought bubble symbol, it will mean there is an activity for you to have a go at should you wish to. Simply pause the video and give it a go. Remember to always be kind to yourself when watching these video presentations. Be aware of how you're feeling throughout, and should you need to, take a break or check in with a friend. There are also some suggestions on the last slides for places you can go if you would like to seek further support. To start this presentation, we're going to look at how our brains respond to stress and in turn affect our thinking and behaviour. This is called the stress response. We're going to break down our brains into 3 sections. There are obviously many more than that, but it is only these 3 that are relevant for this concept. They are the brainstem or primitive brain in yellow and the limbic brain in green. Both of these together are sometimes referred to as our downstairs brain and our cortical brain in blue, sometimes referred to as our upstairs brain. They develop from the bottom up, starting with the brainstem, which alerts us to threat and responds to sensory input. This is our survival mechanism. Our limbic brain controls our attachment and emotional development. And lastly, our cortical brain, which is our thinking brain. It controls rational thinking, problem solving, etc. Our cortical brain continues developing until adulthood. When we are stressed or our brain perceives threat, our brainstem is triggered. This is closely connected to our limbic brain, so we will instantly feel an emotion related to this stress or threat. When these 2 parts of our brain are activated, our cortical brain is inhibited, and we cannot access logic, rational thinking, or problem solving. Dependent on how extreme the stress or threat, depends on how far we can access our cortical brain. This doesn't have to be on an extreme level or when you're under extreme stress. Have you ever been put on the spot or in a slightly stressful situation, like at the airport customs, and been asked your name and date of birth? You may notice the answer doesn't come to you automatically like it normally would. You may have to actively think about it or say, first. This is all part of the stress response. For some of our young people, this can really affect their behaviour, as they may enter their fight, flight, freeze response, which will be explained further in the presentation. In order to bring their behaviour and thinking back to a calm state, you have to calm the stress response through regulation. This will also be explained further throughout the stress response presentations. We can explain the concept discussed in the previous slide using Dan Siegel's hand model. So when we are in a positive state of mind, we're feeling safe, we're positive and motivated, and we're feeling positive and calm. Our fist will be clenched and our thumb will be hidden underneath our fingers. Our 4 fingers demonstrate our cortical thinking brain, and it is down because it is activated. Our thumb represents our limbic brain, and our brainstem is represented by the bottom of the palm of our hand and our wrist. When we are in more of a negative state of mind, we refer to this as flipping our lid. So our stress response will be very engaged and we're not able to access our thinking. So when we're demonstrating in this way, our fingers will be up and our thumb will still be tucked in. So this is when we are very hypervigilant to threat. We're not able to think and access our thinking brain. And all our energy is also diverted to the emotions that we'll be thinking, that we'll be feeling. You can watch an explanation of this by Dan Siegel on some of the links provided in this slide.
We're going to have a look now at what the different fight, flight, freeze responses might look like on the outside. So as we mentioned with the fight response, this can usually appear as someone being quite angry or aggressive, maybe being demanding and inflexible, lying or blaming others, not being able to concentrate, and generally quite disrespectful and disruptive. If you want some more information throughout these slides about what the different responses might look like on the outside, there's a link at the bottom there that you can click to access some more information on this. Moving on to the flight response, what this might look like on the outside could be someone constantly trying to keep busy, maybe as a way to avoid whatever it is they are feeling anxious about. We might see in young people as well, maybe constantly asking to go to the toilet in class to again try to avoid and get away from the situation that they're in. Maybe constantly asking to get something outside the classroom, hiding under tables, and not being able to cope well in free time as well. We might also see some aggression, maybe baby talk or crying, or also hyperactivity as well, so being quite silly. And then we have the freeze response. And on the outside, this might look like someone maybe seeming not interested or bored. They might be hard to move through a task, maybe trying to distract and talk about other things. They might seem quite vacant, so daydreaming and staring into space or not listening, and maybe a bit slow to move when asked as well. Sometimes the freeze response can be quite easy to miss because you're not seeing such kind of disruptive behaviours. But again, it's important to recognise what might be going on underneath this response as well. Another response that's quite often overlooked is a flop, drop and collapse response. So on the outside, this might just seem like a child that never usually complains because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. They might seem quite socially withdrawn and quiet, maybe with their head on a desk, being able to think, so maybe answering just simply with yes or no answers. They might present as someone with low mood, maybe slow movement, and being generally quite disconnected and withdrawn.
And here's how someone might be feeling when they're going through the fight, flight, freeze or flop, drop, collapse response. If you want to take a moment now to just have a read through each of these. You may also be able to recognise some of these feelings for yourself when you've experienced either the fight, flight, freeze or flop responses. Also for some of those children that you recognise are experiencing any of these responses, this is what they may be feeling on the inside. If you want any further information around this, please just head towards the concept index.
When we're thinking about our emotional pot, the analogy and the window of tolerance, and how trauma impacts on how our emotional regulation works, the emotional pot analogy and the window of tolerance are talked about in more detail in the concept index if you haven't come across those concepts before. When we talk about the emotional pot and we talk about how emotions fill up in that pot, and how there is kind of a mesh system that helps to develop self-regulation. Experience of trauma and adverse childhood experiences could be one of the contributing factors that kind of block up that mesh filter area of our emotional pot, and then that results in the young person or child or adult not being able to self-regulate, not being able to ebb and flow their emotions as they come in and go during the day, but that as emotions come into the pot, it just gets fuller and fuller and fuller until it just overflows and triggers off a stress response. We also think about the window of tolerance, the space between where the emotions are full in the pot and the gap between the top of the pot and the emotions. That's our space for tolerating uncertainty, or it's where our patience lies. It's what happens when we are happy to learn and be curious and be challenged. All of those things happen when we're in our window of tolerance, when we're regulated and we feel safe and we're ready to learn. And actually, it's suggested that children, young people who've experienced trauma, the window of tolerance can be slightly smaller too, to start off with. So smaller amounts of stress can still cause a similar stress response, because it doesn't take quite so much to actually get the emotional pot overflowing with emotions. The Thurrock COVID-19 Child Wellbeing Support Line has been set up to support children, young people, their families and school staff during the coronavirus pandemic. It is for anybody to call or email if they'd like to speak to somebody about an issue or a theme to do with wellbeing. This can be staff from school, parents and family members, young people themselves. If they call the support line number or email the helpline email, leave a message with their name and contact number, and someone from the team will call them back. There are also some other contacts here for local support services. Now we're at the end of this session, it's a good time just to check in with yourself and to see how you're feeling now. As we said in the beginning, the content of the WER programme can impact on how we're thinking or feeling and how it relates to us in our everyday lives. If you've been affected by anything you have read or heard about today, please seek support, either from your own support network, and there's some ideas listed on the slide here, or from additional support networks, whether that's local services or national sources of support.